They told Elowyn Hale she was defective, barren, worthless, so they threw her out, into the frozen wasteland where failures go to die quietly. But on the night a bleeding beast collapsed at her cabin door with a silent child clutched against its massive chest, Elowyn did something no one expected from a discarded woman. She opened the door. That choice changed everything. What she saved wasn't just a monster, it was the most dangerous alpha in the realm, cursed and forgotten. And he'd been waiting for her. If you want to see how a woman the world threw away became the one thing powerful men couldn't break, stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from. The wind didn't howl at the edge of the world, it screamed. Elowyn Hale had learned that distinction in the 16 months she'd been exiled to the frozen frontier, where civilization ended and the wild took over with teeth bared. The cabin she lived in wasn't hers by choice. It was a discard pile, same as her. 4 crooked walls, a roof that leaked black water when it rained, and a door that hung so poorly she'd stuffed rags in the gaps just to keep the cold from crawling in like a living thing. She knelt by the fireplace now, coaxing reluctant flames from damp wood, her fingers cracked and red. The fire sputtered, smoked, refused to catch properly. Story of her goddamn life. "Come on," she muttered, blowing gently on the embers. "Just come on." The wind answered with a rattling gust that shook the entire structure. Snow hissed against the shuttered windows. Somewhere in the dark outside, something metal clanged, probably the broken fence post she'd been meaning to fix for 3 weeks. Elowyn didn't bother looking. Out here, you learned fast. If it wasn't bleeding or on fire, it could wait until morning. The flames finally caught. Small, weak, but alive. She sat back on her heels, staring into the orange glow, and let herself feel the ache in her chest, the one that had nothing to do with the cold. 16 months since they'd cast her out. 16 months since her own partner, former partner, had looked at her with something worse than anger. Disgust, maybe. Pity, definitely. And said the words that still sat like stones in her stomach. "You're broken, Elowyn. We tried. God knows we tried, but I can't keep pretending this is going to work." She'd known what he meant. Everyone knew. In a world where survival depended on strong bloodlines, where worth was measured in children and legacy, a woman who couldn't conceive was a liability, a waste of resources. The healers had confirmed it after 2 years of trying, 2 years of treatments that left her hollow and sick. 2 years of watching hope turn into resentment in the eyes of a man who'd once promised her everything. The community council had been kinder than most, she supposed. They didn't exile her immediately. They gave her 6 months to find another match, as if anyone wanted damaged goods. No one did. So they'd sent her here, to Boundary's End, the farthest settlement on the northern frontier, where the unwanted went to disappear quietly. A mercy, they called it. Better than execution, better than the stocks. Elowyn called it what it was, slow death by irrelevance. She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. The cabin was barely warmer than the night outside, but she'd stopped wasting firewood on comfort months ago. You burned what you needed to survive, nothing more. The fire crackled softly, and then something else. A sound, low, guttural. Not wind. Elowyn's head snapped up. She held her breath, listening past the howl of the storm. There it was again. A dragging sound, heavy, accompanied by a wet, labored breathing that made the hair on her arms stand up. Something was outside. She stood slowly, reaching for the iron poker by the fireplace. Her heart kicked against her ribs. Out here, something outside was never good. Wolves sometimes. Starving bears if you were unlucky. Occasionally desperate men from the mining camps farther east, looking for food or worse. The dragging sound grew louder, closer, then a thud against the door, hard enough to shake it in its frame. Elowyn froze. Another thud, weaker this time, followed by a sound that raised every animal instinct in her body, a low, agonized growl that dissolved into something almost like whimpering. Something's hurt. Her rational mind screamed at her to stay put, to let whatever it was die on her doorstep and deal with the corpse in the morning. But her hand was already moving, setting down the poker, reaching for the door latch. She cracked it open. The wind hit her like a fist, driving snow into her face. She squinted into the storm, barely able to see 3 feet in front of her. And then she saw it. The beast. It lay collapsed against the base of her door, massive and dark, its body heaving with shallow, ragged breaths. Blood stained the snow around it, too much blood. Its fur, matted and filthy, looked almost black in the dim light spilling from her cabin. But it was the size that froze her in place. The thing was huge, bigger than any wolf she'd ever seen, bigger than a bear. Its shoulders were broader than a man's, its limbs thick with muscle beneath the torn hide. One of its front legs was bent at an unnatural angle, and deep gashes raked across its side, exposing raw flesh beneath. Elowyn's breath came in short, sharp gasps. What the hell is that? And then the beast shifted. Not to attack, to protect. Because beneath it, huddled against its blood-soaked chest, was a child. Elowyn's heart stopped. A little girl, maybe 4 or 5 years old, with tangled dark hair and a face streaked with dirt and tears. Her eyes were wide, glassy with shock, and she clung to the beast's fur with tiny fists, silent and shaking. The beast's golden eyes, wrong, too intelligent, too aware, fixed on Elowyn. It made a sound, low and desperate, and pushed the child forward with its massive head. Toward her. Help her, those eyes said. Please. Elowyn stood there, wind tearing at her clothes, snow blinding her, staring at the impossible scene in front of her. Every survival instinct she had screamed at her to slam the door, to lock it, to pretend she'd never seen this. Because if she helped, if she got involved, it would mean something. It would mean risking the fragile, lonely safety she'd carved out for herself. It would mean questions she didn't have answers to. The beast's breathing hitched, blood pooled faster in the snow. The child stared at her with huge, terrified eyes, and Elowyn thought, no one helped me when I needed it. She stepped outside. The next 30 minutes were a blur of adrenaline and instinct. Elowyn dragged the child inside first. The girl was light, half-starved, and didn't make a sound as Elowyn wrapped her in a blanket and set her by the fire. Then came the beast. God, it was heavy. She looped a rope under its shoulders and hauled with everything she had, her boots slipping in the bloody snow, her muscles screaming. The beast didn't resist. It barely moved, its breaths coming in wet, rattling gasps that told Elowyn its time was running out. Come on, she hissed through gritted teeth, pulling harder. Don't you dare die on me now. The beast shifted, just enough to help. Its hind legs pushed weakly, and together they got it over the threshold and onto the rough wooden floor. Elowyn slammed the door shut, gasping, her hands shaking. The cabin felt impossibly small now, crowded with the massive bulk of the dying creature. She stood there for a moment, hands on her knees, trying to catch her breath. What the hell did I just do? The child whimpered softly. Elowyn's head snapped toward her. The little girl had curled into a tight ball by the fire, her eyes fixed on the beast with an expression that shattered something in Elowyn's chest. She thinks it's going to die. Elowyn moved. She'd learned basic field medicine from necessity. Out here, you either knew how to stitch yourself up or you bled out alone. She grabbed her kit, what little she had, needle and thread, strips of boiled cloth, a half-empty bottle of whiskey that burned going down and burned worse, going in a wound. The beast's injuries were wrong. Not just deep, though they were, gashes that looked like claw marks from something bigger than this thing, but wrong in a way that made Elowyn's hands hesitate. The edges of the wounds were blackened, almost burned, and when she touched them, a faint shimmer of something not quite light flickered across the beast's skin. Magic. Elowyn's stomach dropped. She'd heard stories, everyone had, about the cursed ones, about shifters, humans who could take animal form, beings of old power that most people thought were legends now. The kind of power the church had spent centuries hunting down and eradicating. This isn't just a beast. The creature's eyes opened, golden and glowing faintly, and locked onto hers. Elowyn held its gaze. I don't know what you are, she said quietly, but if you die in my cabin, I'm the one they'll burn for it, so you're going to stay alive, understand? The beast blinked slowly, almost like agreement. She got to work. Hours passed. Elowyn stitched and cleaned and wrapped, her hands steady despite the fear thrumming in her veins. The beast never made a sound, even when she poured whiskey directly into the worst of the wounds. It just watched her, those two intelligent eyes tracking every movement. The child fell asleep eventually, curled against the beast's side, one small hand tangled in its fur. When Elwyn finally sat back, exhausted, the first gray light of dawn was creeping through the cracks in the shutters. The beast's breathing had steadied. The bleeding had stopped. It would live, for now. Elwyn stared at the impossible scene in her cabin. A dying monster, a traumatized child, and her, a woman the world had decided wasn't worth keeping. She laughed, once, a short, bitter sound. "What the hell have I done?" The beast healed faster than anything natural. Elwyn watched, fascinated and unnerved, as the gashes across its side began to close within 2 days. The blackened edges faded. The swelling in its broken leg went down. By the end of the first week, it could stand, unsteadily, but it could stand. The child was slower to recover. Her name, Elwyn learned through patience and gentle coaxing, was Mira. She didn't speak, couldn't or wouldn't, Elwyn wasn't sure, but she communicated in small ways. A nod for yes, a shake for no. Wide eyes when she was frightened, which was often. She never left the beast's side. At night she slept curled against its massive chest, and the beast, impossibly, tenderly, would curve its body around her like a shield. During the day, when the beast was too weak to move, Mira would sit beside it, humming tuneless songs and stroking its fur with her tiny hands. And the beast watched Elwyn, constantly. Those golden eyes tracked her across the cabin as she cooked thin soup over the fire, as she mended clothes, as she stood at the window and stared out at the endless white expanse beyond. It wasn't threatening, it was studying, like it was trying to figure her out. Elwyn found herself talking to it. "You're lucky I'm crazy," she said one evening, stirring a pot of broth made from the last of her dried meat. "Anyone else would have shot you and sold your hide, probably gotten a decent price for it too." The beast huffed softly, almost like laughter. Elwyn glanced over. "You understand me, don't you?" It blinked. Once. Slow and deliberate. "Right." She shook her head. "Of course you do, because my life wasn't complicated enough." Mira giggled, the first sound Elwyn had heard her make beyond whimpers. The little girl looked up at her with something almost like a smile, and Elwyn's heart did a painful twist in her chest. When did I start caring about them? She didn't have an answer for that, but she knew. Watching the beast lean down to nuzzle Mira's hair, watching the little girl's face light up, that it was already too late. 2 weeks after the beast arrived, the past came knocking. Elwyn heard the horses before she saw them, hoofbeats crunching through snow, too many to be a traitor. Her blood went cold. No. She moved fast, shoving Mira toward the back corner of the cabin. "Hide! Don't come out unless I say." Mira's eyes went wide with fear, but she obeyed, squeezing herself into the narrow space between the wall and an old trunk. The beast tried to stand. Elwyn pushed it down with both hands. "Stay! Down!" It growled, low and warning. "I mean it," Elwyn hissed. "If they see you." A sharp knock rattled the door. Elwyn's heart hammered. She straightened, wiping her hands on her skirt, and forced her face into something neutral, calm. She opened the door. 3 men stood in the snow. 2 she didn't recognize. Hired muscle, probably, rough-looking and armed. But the third, her stomach dropped. Marcus, her former partner. The man who'd looked at her with pity and disgust and told her she was broken. He looked different now. Harder. Older. But his eyes were the same, cold and assessing. "Elwyn," he said, his voice flat. She kept her hand on the door. "Marcus, you going to invite us in?" "No." His jaw tightened. "We've been tracking something. Big. Dangerous. Trail led us here." Elwyn's pulse roared in her ears. She kept her face blank. "Haven't seen anything." "That's so." Marcus's eyes flicked past her, into the cabin. "Mind if we take a look?" "Yes," she said coldly. "I do." One of the hired men stepped forward, hand on his sword. "We don't need your permission, woman." "You're on my land," Elwyn cut in, her voice sharp as broken glass. "Council law says you need a warrant to enter without permission. You have one?" Marcus's expression darkened. "Don't make this difficult." "Then don't make threats you can't back up." For a long moment they stared at each other. The wind howled between them. Snow fell in lazy spirals. Finally, Marcus smiled, thin and humorless. You always were stubborn. Fine. We'll camp nearby. But if we find out you're hiding something... He let the threat hang. Eowyn slammed the door in his face. Her knees nearly gave out. She pressed her back against the door, breathing hard, her whole body shaking. The beast was on its feet now, teeth bared, a growl rumbling deep in its chest. I know, Eowyn whispered. I know. Mira crept out of her hiding spot, eyes huge and wet. Eowyn pulled the child into her arms, holding her tight, and realized with perfect clarity that she was going to have to make a choice. Let them take the beast. Let them kill it, because that's what men like Marcus did to things they didn't understand, and save herself. Or fight. For the first time in 16 months, Eowyn Hale wasn't invisible, and she wasn't going to disappear quietly. That night, Eowyn didn't sleep. She sat by the window with the iron poker across her lap, watching the orange glow of Marcus's campfire through the trees. 3 shadows moved around it, dark shapes against the snow. They were close enough that she could hear their voices sometimes, carried on the wind, low, indistinct murmurs that set her teeth on edge. The beast lay near the fireplace, its golden eyes open and alert. It hadn't relaxed since Marcus left. Every few minutes its head would lift, nostrils flaring, testing the air for threat. Mira slept fitfully between them, curled in a nest of blankets, whimpering in her dreams. Eowyn's hands tightened on the poker. The cold metal bit into her palms. She'd known this peace wouldn't last. Nothing good ever did out here. But she'd let herself hope anyway. Let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, the world would forget about her long enough for her to figure out what the hell she was doing. Stupid. The fire in Marcus's camp burned lower. One of the shadows stood, stretched, then disappeared into a tent. Then another. Finally, Marcus himself. She recognized his silhouette, the way he moved, ducked inside. But Eowyn knew better than to think they were sleeping. Men like Marcus didn't give up. They waited. They planned. They came back harder. We can't stay here, she whispered. The beast's ear twitched. It turned its massive head toward her, and for a moment their eyes met across the dim cabin. Eowyn felt something pass between them. An understanding, maybe, or just shared exhaustion. She didn't know anymore. Didn't care. If we run, they'll track us. If we stay, they'll find a reason to search this place, warrant or not. She rubbed her face with one hand. We're trapped. The beast made a low sound, not quite a growl. Almost thoughtful. Eowyn laughed bitterly. Yeah, I don't have an answer either. Outside, the wind picked up. Snow hissed against the shutters. The campfire flickered and held. And Eowyn sat in the dark, holding a poker like it could save her, waiting for the world to come crashing in. Morning came gray and merciless. Eowyn woke with her neck cramped from sleeping half upright against the wall. She'd drifted off sometime before dawn, her body betraying her despite every intention to stay vigilant. Now pale light leaked through the cracks in the shutters, and the cabin was freezing. She'd let the fire die to embers. She stood stiffly, wincing as her joints protested. Mira was still asleep, thank God. The child had barely gotten a full night's rest since she'd arrived. Eowyn wasn't about to wake her now. The beast was already awake, standing near the door with its head lowered, listening. Eowyn moved to the window and carefully eased the shutter open just enough to see out. The camp was still there. 2 tents, sagging slightly under fresh snow. No movement yet, but smoke rose from a newly stoked fire. They were awake, getting ready. Her stomach twisted. She closed the shutter and turned to find the beast watching her. They're not leaving, she said quietly. Are they? The beast's eyes gleamed. It shook its head, an almost human gesture that sent a chill down Eowyn's spine. Right. She exhaled slowly. Then I need to give them a reason to. She didn't have a plan, not really, but she had something Marcus wanted, information, or at least the appearance of it. If she could convince him the beast had moved on, that it was never here. It was a long shot, but it was all she had. Eowyn pulled on her heavy coat, wrapped a scarf around her neck, and grabbed the water pail. Normal, routine. Just another morning at Boundary's End. Stay here, she told the beast. Keep Mira quiet. I'll be back. It growled softly, a warning. I know, Elowen said, but if I don't go out there, they'll come in here, and we both know how that ends. The beast held her gaze for a long moment, then reluctantly, it backed away from the door. Elowen stepped outside. The cold hit her like a fist. She gasped, her breath pluming white, and forced herself to move with deliberate calm toward the well. Normal, routine, nothing to see here. She was halfway there when Marcus emerged from his tent. Morning, Elowen. She didn't look at him, just kept walking, boots crunching through fresh snow. Morning. Cold one. They all are. She reached the well and lowered the bucket, the rope creaking as it descended into darkness. Behind her, she heard Marcus's footsteps. Closer. Sleep well? He asked. Well enough. The bucket hit water with a distant splash. Elowen started hauling it up, hand over hand, her muscles straining. Marcus stopped a few feet away, watching. You know, he said, his tone conversational, I forgot how stubborn you get when you're cornered. Elowen's jaw tightened. She kept pulling. Not cornered, just busy. See, that's the thing. Marcus took a step closer. We both know you're lying. Question is why? The bucket reached the top. Elowen grabbed it, sloshing icy water over her hands. I told you, I haven't seen anything. Your tracks say different. She froze. Marcus smiled, thin and cold. You think I'm stupid? There's blood in the snow leading right to your door, a lot of it, and something big was dragged inside. You can see the marks. Elowen's heart hammered. She set the bucket down carefully, buying time. Could have been anything. Wolf, maybe, or a deer. Could have been. Marcus's hand rested on the hilt of his sword. But it wasn't. Was it? She met his eyes, saw the certainty there, the accusation. Whatever you think you're protecting, Marcus said quietly, it's not worth your life. You know that, right? Is that a threat? It's a fact. He gestured toward the cabin. You're alone out here. No one's coming to help you. If that thing in there is what I think it is, if it's one of the cursed, then the law says I have every right to put it down, and anyone who shelters it. Elowen's blood ran cold. There's nothing. Stop. Marcus's voice hardened. Just stop. We're going inside and we're going to search that cabin. You can cooperate, or we can do this the hard way. Your choice. For a moment, Elowen considered fighting. She could grab the bucket, swing it at his head, run. But Marcus wasn't alone. The two hired men had emerged from the other tent now, armed and watching. Even if she got past Marcus, they'd cut her down before she made it 10 feet. She was out of options. Fine, she said, her voice flat. Search. You won't find anything. Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes. We'll see. They walked back to the cabin in tense silence. Elowen in front, Marcus and his men behind. Her mind raced. The beast couldn't hide. It was too big, too obvious. And Mira, God, what would they do to Mira if they found her with the creature? She had to think of something. Had to... The cabin door hung open. Elowen stopped dead. What the hell? Marcus pushed past her, hand on his sword. The cabin was empty. No beast, no child. Just the cold, bare room with the dying fire and the mess of blankets where Mira had been sleeping. Elowen's heart stopped. She stared, uncomprehending. They were just here. She'd left them. Where are they? Marcus spun on her, his face dark with fury. Where the hell did they go? I don't... Elowen's voice caught. She moved inside, frantic now, checking the corners, the back room, anywhere they could have hidden. Nothing. Gone. Both of them. How? One of the hired men crouched by the fireplace, examining the floor. Blood here. Fresh and something else. He touched the boards, then pulled his hand back sharply. It's warm, like burned. Marcus's eyes narrowed. Magic. Elowen's stomach dropped. It was here, Marcus said slowly, piecing it together. You were hiding it, and now it's run. Probably heard us coming. He turned to his men. Fan out. Search the perimeter. It's injured and it's got a kid with it. It can't have gone far. They moved immediately, heading for the door. Wait. Elowen started forward, but Marcus caught her arm, his grip bruising. You're staying here. Let go of me. You lied to me. His voice was low, dangerous. You looked me in the eye and lied. That thing is cursed, Elowen. You know what the council does to people who harbor the cursed? She wrenched her arm free. It's not a thing, and it didn't hurt anyone. It's an abomination. Marcus's face twisted with something like disgust. The old laws are clear. Magic like that doesn't belong in this world, and neither do the people stupid enough to protect it. Elowen took a step back, her pulse roaring. So what? You're going to kill me for showing mercy? I'm going to do what the law requires. Marcus drew his sword. And if that thing comes back, if I even think you're trying to warn it, I'll make sure the council knows exactly what you've been doing out here. The blade gleamed in the dim light. Elowen stared at it, then at Marcus, and felt something crack open inside her. Not fear, not anymore. Rage. You want to know the truth? She said, her voice shaking. That thing you're hunting. It saved that little girl, carried her through a blizzard, half dead, bleeding out, and brought her to the one place it thought she'd be safe. It didn't attack me, didn't threaten me. It trusted me. She laughed, bitter and sharp. Which is more than I can say for you. Marcus's jaw tightened. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. Elowen stepped closer, reckless now, past caring. You threw me away because I couldn't give you what you wanted. You looked at me like I was broken. And now you're here, ready to kill something that's shown me more humanity than you ever did. So yeah, Marcus, I lied, and I'd do it again. For a moment, the only sound was the wind outside and the crackling of the dying fire. Then Marcus raised his sword. You've made your choice. A shadow moved in the doorway. Marcus spun, blade up, and the beast lunged. It hit him like an avalanche, all muscle and fury, driving him back into the wall with a crash that shook the entire cabin. Marcus's sword clattered to the floor. He screamed, hands scrabbling at the massive jaws inches from his face, and the beast snarled, a sound so deep and primal that Elowen felt it in her bones. No, stop! She didn't know who she was shouting at. The beast. Marcus. Both. The beast's teeth were bared, its eyes wild, and for a second Elowen thought it was going to rip Marcus's throat out. But it didn't. It held him there, pinned, growling low and continuous, a warning carved into sound. Then, slowly, it stepped back. Marcus collapsed against the wall, gasping, his face white. Blood trickled from where the beast's claws had dug into his shoulders, but he was alive, shaken, terrified, but alive. The beast turned its back on him. Contempt, that gesture said, and moved to Elowen's side. She stared at it, her heart pounding. You came back. It huffed softly. Of course I did. Outside, the hired men were shouting, running toward the cabin. Elowen heard boots on the snow, weapons being drawn. Marcus struggled to his feet, clutching his bleeding shoulder. His eyes were wide, furious and afraid all at once. You're dead, he spat. Both of you. The beast growled, a low rumble that silenced him. And then, impossibly, it spoke. Not with words, not exactly, but Elowen heard it anyway. A voice in her mind like distant thunder. Protect the child. Her breath caught. She looked down, and there, huddled in the corner behind an overturned trunk, was Mira. The little girl must have hidden when Marcus came in, must have stayed silent and still while the beast fought. Smart kid. The hired men burst through the door, swords drawn, and froze when they saw the beast. Kill it, Marcus shouted. They hesitated. The beast was huge, blood-streaked, and radiating violence. It stood between them and Elowen, head lowered, every muscle coiled to strike. One of the men raised a crossbow, and Elowen moved without thinking. She threw herself in front of the beast, arms spread wide, her body a shield. No! The man froze, the crossbow aimed directly at her chest. Marcus stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Elowen, get out of the way. Shoot that thing, and you shoot me too, she said, her voice steady despite the terror screaming through her veins. You want to explain that to the council? How you killed an unarmed woman in her own home? She's harboring a cursed creature, Marcus snarled. The law says you need proof of harm. Elowen's heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Where's your proof? Who did it hurt? Show me. The men exchanged glances. The one with the crossbow lowered it slightly, uncertain. It attacked me, Marcus started. After you drew your sword on me, Elowen cut in. I've got a cabin full of witnesses. You want to take this to the council, Marcus? Really? Because I'm happy to tell them exactly how you threatened an exiled woman and broke into her home without a warrant. Marcus's face went red. You lying? I'm not lying. Elowen's voice was ice. And you know it. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to take your men, and you're going to leave. Now. And if I ever see you on my land again, I'll report you for harassment. Understand? For a long, terrible moment, no one moved. Then Marcus spat blood onto the floor. You're going to regret this. Maybe, Elowen said, but not today. He gestured sharply to his men. They backed out slowly, weapons still raised, eyes locked on the beast. Marcus was the last to leave. He paused in the doorway, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. This isn't over, he said quietly. It never is, Elowen replied. He left. The door swung shut behind him, and the cabin fell into ringing silence. Elowen stood there, trembling, her arms still outstretched, her breath coming in short gasps. The beast nudged her gently with its head, a gesture almost like reassurance. She turned, looked into those golden eyes, and felt something shift inside her, something fundamental. I just threw away the last shred of safety I had, she whispered. For you. The beast blinked slowly. I know. They'll come back. They'll bring more men, more weapons. They won't stop until... The beast pressed its forehead against hers, and the voice in her mind was gentle, certain. Then we fight together. Mira crawled out from behind the trunk, her eyes huge and wet. She ran to Elowen, wrapped her small arms around her leg, and held on tight. Elowen closed her eyes. Outside, she heard the sound of horses. Marcus and his men riding away. But they'd be back. And when they came, there would be no more words, no more warnings, just blood. Elowen sank to her knees, pulling Mira into her arms, and let the beast curl its massive body around them both. They stayed like that for a long time, three broken things clinging to each other in the freezing dark. She'd made her choice. Now she'd have to live with it. The days that followed were tense and strange. Elowen knew Marcus would report back to the council, knew that sooner or later they'd send someone, soldiers probably, or hunters trained to deal with cursed creatures. She had a week, maybe two, before the hammer fell. So she prepared. She reinforced the cabin's weak points, nailing boards over the windows and bracing the door with a heavy beam. She gathered what supplies she could, dried meat, water, firewood, and stashed them where they'd be easy to grab. She even tried to map out escape routes through the forest, though she knew the terrain was brutal this time of year. And she watched the beast. It was healing faster now, the wounds closing at an unnatural rate. Within 3 days, it could move without limping. Within 5, the gashes across its side had faded to angry red lines. By the end of the week, it was nearly whole again, stronger, faster, more powerful than anything Elowen had ever seen. And it stayed. That was the part she couldn't wrap her head around. The beast could leave any time it wanted. It was healed enough to travel, strong enough to survive out there. But every morning, Elowen woke to find it curled by the fire, watching over Mira. Every night, it settled near the door like a guardian. It chose to stay. Why? She asked one evening as they sat by the fire. Mira was asleep, her small body tucked against the beast's side. You could run. Get far away from here before they come back. Why risk it? The beast looked at her with those impossibly intelligent eyes, and then it did something that made Elowen's breath catch. It began to change. The transformation wasn't smooth. It was painful, violent, bones cracking and reshaping, fur receding into skin, the massive body collapsing inward. Elowen scrambled back, her heart in her throat, as the beast convulsed and twisted and broke. And then, where the creature had been, a man knelt on the floor. He was gasping, shaking, his body slick with sweat. Dark hair hung in his face. His skin was marked with scars, some old, some fresh. He wore no clothes, and Elowen turned her head instinctively, her face burning. I'm sorry, the man said, his voice hoarse and rough from disuse. I didn't mean to frighten you. Elowen kept her eyes on the wall. You're cursed, he laughed bitterly. Yes, I suppose that's one word for it. She heard him move, fabric rustling. When she dared to look back, he'd wrapped himself in one of the blankets. He sat against the wall, head tipped back, exhausted. He looked human, painfully so. Broad-shouldered and scarred, with a face that might have been handsome once, before whatever hell had carved it into hard angles. His eyes, though, those were the same, golden, piercing. "My name is Rowan," he said quietly. "Rowan Varick, and I owe you my life." Elowyn stared at him. "You can talk." "I can. I just couldn't before. The curse," he grimaced. "It's complicated. Try me." Rowan was silent for a moment, his gaze distant. Then he sighed. "I was an alpha once, leader of a pack in the Northern Territories. We lived free, away from human settlements, following the old ways. But the church found us, called us abominations, sent hunters." Elowyn's stomach turned. She'd heard the stories, the purges, entire communities wiped out in the name of purity. "Most of my pack died," Rowan continued, his voice flat. "The survivors scattered. I fought, killed more hunters than I can count, but they had a mage with them, someone who knew the old magic. He cursed me." He touched his chest, where faint scars formed a symbol Elowyn didn't recognize. "Locked me in beast form, took my voice, my humanity, left me to wander the wilderness like an animal." "How long?" Elowyn whispered. 5 years. She closed her eyes. 5 years trapped in your own body, unable to speak, unable to shift back, unable to even beg for help. "The child," she said. "Mira, how—" "I found her in a burned village 3 months ago." Rowan's voice cracked. "Raiders had come through, killed everyone. She was hiding in a cellar, half-starved. I couldn't leave her." He looked down at the sleeping girl, his expression softening. "She's been with me ever since. Doesn't speak, but I think she understands me. The beast, at least." "And the wounds you had when you got here?" "Hunters." Rowan's jaw tightened. "They caught up with me 2 weeks ago. I fought them off, but barely. I knew I was dying, and I thought—" He met Elowyn's eyes. "I thought, if I could just get Mira somewhere safe, somewhere warm, then maybe it would be enough. Maybe she'd survive." "So you brought her here?" "I brought her to you." His gaze was intense. "I watched you before I collapsed. Saw the way you lived, alone, cast out. I thought, someone who knows what it's like to be unwanted might not turn us away." Elowyn's throat tightened. "You were right." "I know." Rowan smiled faintly. "And when you opened that door, when you pulled me inside and stitched me up and fought for me, something in the curse cracked. Just a little. Enough that I can shift now, for short periods. Enough that I can speak. Because I helped you? Because you chose to." He leaned forward. "The curse was built on isolation, on the belief that I was a monster, unworthy of mercy. But you didn't see a monster. You saw someone who needed help, and that—" His voice broke. "That changed everything." Elowyn didn't know what to say. She sat there, staring at this man who'd been a beast, who'd suffered for years, who'd chosen to trust her when he had every reason not to. "They're coming back," she said finally. "Marcus and the council. They'll bring hunters, maybe a mage. I know. You could still leave, take Mira, head north, find what's left of your people." "No," Rowan's voice was firm. "I'm not running anymore. And I'm not leaving you to face them alone. Rowan, you stood between me and a crossbow." He met her eyes, unflinching. "You threw yourself in front of death for a creature you barely knew. Why would I do any less for you?" Elowyn's breath caught. "Besides," Rowan added, a hint of dark humor in his voice, "I owe Marcus a scar or two. Call it repayment." Despite everything, Elowyn laughed. It was a broken sound, but real. Rowan smiled, small and tentative, like he'd forgotten how. And for the first time since she'd been exiled to this frozen hellhole, Elowyn didn't feel alone. 3 days later, they came. Elowyn saw them from a distance, a group of riders, at least a dozen, moving through the snow with grim purpose. They wore the council's colors and carried weapons that glinted cold in the weak sunlight. Rowan, she called. He was already shifting, his body rippling and expanding, bones cracking as the beast took over. It was faster now, smoother, like his body was remembering what it was supposed to be. Mira clutched Elowin's hand, her eyes wide. Stay inside, Elowin told her. No matter what happens, stay inside. Understand? The little girl nodded, tears already streaming down her face. Elowin kissed her forehead, then stepped outside. The riders stopped 30 feet from the cabin, forming a loose semicircle. Marcus was at the front, his face hard and triumphant. Beside him was a woman in dark robes, a mage, Elowin realized with a jolt of fear. The church's enforcer. Elowin Hale, the mage called, her voice cold and clear. You stand accused of harboring a cursed creature in violation of the sacred laws. Surrender it now, and you may yet receive mercy. Elowin stood her ground. There's no creature here, just me. Lying to the council is a crime, Marcus said. We have testimony, evidence. From who? You? Elowin laughed bitterly. You broke into my home, drew a weapon on me, and got your ass handed to you. That's your evidence? The mage's eyes narrowed. She raised one hand and the air around her shimmered with power. I can feel the curse from here, girl. Don't insult my intelligence. Rowan, still in beast form, stepped out of the cabin behind Elowin. The riders tensed. Several drew weapons. The mage smiled coldly. There it is. His name is Rowan, Elowin said, her voice steady. He's a person, and he hasn't hurt anyone. It is an abomination, the mage corrected, and the law is clear. Then your law is wrong. The words hung in the frozen air. Marcus's face darkened. Stand aside, Elowin. This is your last chance. She didn't move. No. The mage sighed. So be it. She raised both hands and light erupted from her palms, blinding, searing, white-hot magic that screamed through the air toward Rowan. Elowin didn't think. She just moved. She threw herself in front of the blast, arms spread wide, and the magic hit her like a battering ram. Pain exploded through her body, every nerve on fire, her vision whiting out. She heard Rowan roar, heard Marcus shouting, heard the riders scattering, and then light. Not from the mage. From her. From the space between her and Rowan, where something ancient and powerful surged to life. The curse mark on Rowan's chest blazed gold, and Elowin felt it, felt the magic breaking, shattering, dissolving under the force of something stronger. The bond. The choice. The unbreakable truth that she would die for him. And that mattered more than any curse ever could. The light exploded outward, a shockwave that knocked the riders from their horses and sent the mage sprawling. When it faded, Elowin collapsed to her knees, gasping, and Rowan stood behind her, human. Fully human. The curse was broken. He caught her before she hit the ground, his arms strong and sure, and pulled her against his chest. You're insane, he whispered, his voice shaking. Elowin laughed weakly. Yeah, I know. The mage struggled to her feet, staring at them with wide, disbelieving eyes. Impossible. Apparently not, Elowin managed. Marcus looked between them, his face twisted with fury and fear. Kill them both! But the riders didn't move. They stared at Rowan, at the man who'd been a beast, now standing whole and human, and something like awe crossed their faces. One of them lowered his weapon, then another. The mage's face went pale. She looked at Elowin, at Rowan, at the fading golden light still shimmering in the air between them. This isn't over, she said quietly. It is for today, Rowan replied. The mage turned and walked away, her robes whipping in the wind. The riders followed, one by one, until only Marcus remained. He stared at Elowin with something that might have been regret, or hatred. She couldn't tell anymore. You chose him over your own people, he said. No, Elowin said, her voice raw. I chose mercy over cruelty. There's a difference. Marcus shook his head and rode away, and Elowin, still cradled in Rowan's arms, finally let herself cry. And Elowin, still cradled in Rowan's arms, finally let herself cry. She didn't cry like she used to, those quiet, ashamed tears she'd shed alone in the dark after Marcus had cast her out. This was different, raw, ugly. The kind of crying that came from somewhere deep and broken, where all the anger and fear and loneliness she'd been holding back for 16 months finally ripped free. Rowan held her through it, his arms steady, his chest rising and falling against her cheek. He didn't speak, didn't try to comfort her with empty words. He just held on. When the sobs finally subsided into hiccuping breaths, Elowen pulled back, wiping her face with shaking hands. "I'm sorry. Don't." Rowan's voice was rough. "Don't apologize for being human." She looked up at him, really looked. His face was lean and scarred, his hair tangled, his golden eyes tired but fierce. This was the man who'd been trapped in fur and silence for 5 years. The man she'd stitched back together with whiskey and stubbornness. The man she'd just broken a curse for. "I don't understand what happened," she whispered. "That light." "Neither do I." Rowan touched his chest where the curse mark had been. The skin there was smooth now, unmarred. "But I felt it, like something snapped, like chains falling away." The mage said it was impossible. "Good." A hint of a smile crossed his face. "I like impossible." Elowen laughed, a broken, exhausted sound. Then she remembered. "Mira." The little girl was standing in the doorway of the cabin, tears streaming down her face, her small body trembling. When she saw them looking, she ran. Rowan caught her, scooping her up with one arm. Mira buried her face in his neck and sobbed. Not silent anymore, but loud and messy and desperate. "Shh," Rowan murmured, his voice gentle. "It's okay. We're okay." But Elowen knew better. They weren't okay. Not even close. The council wouldn't let this go. Elowen knew that the way she knew winter was coming, inevitable, merciless, and already too close. The mage had retreated today, but she'd be back. With reinforcements, with a plan. And this time, they wouldn't hesitate. Rowan knew it too. That night, after Mira had cried herself to sleep, he sat by the fire with Elowen and said the thing neither of them wanted to hear. "We have to leave." Elowen stared into the flames. "Where would we go?" "North, to the Frost Peak Mountains. There are communities there, packs, families, people like me who've survived the purges." He paused. "They'd take us in." "You mean they'd take you in?" "They'd take all of us." Elowen shook her head. "I'm human, Rowan. Your people aren't going to welcome me with open arms, not after what the church has done to them." "You're not like them. They don't know that." Rowan leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "So what's your plan? Stay here and wait for the council to come back with an execution order?" "I don't know." The words came out sharper than she intended. Elowen exhaled, trying to steady herself. I don't know." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Finally, Rowan spoke again, quieter this time. "You saved my life. Twice. The least I can do is get you somewhere safe." "Safe?" Elowen laughed bitterly. "There's no such thing, not for people like us." "Then we make it." His eyes met hers, fierce and certain. "Together." The word hung between them, together, and Elowen felt something shift in her chest. Not quite hope. Not yet. But something close. "Okay," she said finally. "We leave at first light." They didn't make it to first light. The attack came 2 hours before dawn. Elowen woke to the sound of breaking glass and Rowan's shout. She rolled out of her makeshift bed, heart hammering, and saw flames, bright orange fire licking up the side of the cabin, spreading fast. "Mira!" she screamed. The little girl was already awake, coughing, her eyes wide with terror. Rowan scooped her up and shoved her toward Elowen. "Get her out! Now!" "What about you?" "Go." Elowen grabbed Mira and ran for the door. The heat was unbearable, the smoke choking. She burst outside into the freezing night and stumbled into the snow, gasping. Men surrounded the cabin, at least 20 of them, armed and armored, their faces grim. The mage stood at the front, her hands still glowing with the remnants of fire magic. "Elowen Hale," she said calmly, as if she hadn't just tried to burn them alive. "You are under arrest for treason against the sacred laws." Elowen clutched Mira tighter, her mind racing. The cabin was an inferno now, flames roaring into the night sky. Rowan was still inside. "Where is the cursed one?" the mage demanded. "There is no cursed one," Elowen spat. "The curse broke. You saw it. I saw a trick. Dark magic, most likely, meant to deceive." The mage stepped closer. "Surrender him, and I'll make your death quick." "He's human!" A roar split the night. Rowan burst through the burning doorway, his body shifting mid-leap. Human to beast in a heartbeat. He landed in the snow with a snarl that made half the soldiers step back. The mage's eyes widened. "Impossible! You keep using that word!" Rowan growled, his voice distorted by the beast's vocal cords but still unmistakably his. "I don't think it means what you think it means." He lunged. Chaos erupted. Soldiers rushed forward, weapons flashing. Rowan tore through them like a storm, all claws and teeth and fury. Blood sprayed across the snow. Men screamed. Elowen yanked Mira behind her, shielding the girl's eyes. "Don't look! Don't!" The mage raised her hands, magic crackling between her fingers. She aimed at Rowan, and Elowen tackled her. They hit the ground hard, Elowen's shoulder slamming into frozen earth. The mage gasped, her concentration breaking, and the magic fizzled out. Elowen scrambled for the woman's throat, driven by pure desperation. "You tried to burn us alive," she snarled. The mage's knee came up, catching Elowen in the ribs. Pain exploded through her chest. She rolled away, wheezing, and the mage stood, already chanting another spell. Fire bloomed in her palms. "Enough!" The voice wasn't Rowan's. It came from the forest, deep, commanding, and unmistakably female. Everyone froze. A woman stepped out of the trees. She was tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair braided down her back and eyes that glowed faintly amber in the firelight. She wore furs and leather and carried no visible weapons, but Elowen felt the power radiating off her like heat from a forge. Behind her, more shapes emerged from the shadows. Wolves. No, people who could become wolves, shifters, at least a dozen of them, moving with predatory grace. The mage's face went white. "The northern packs are done running," the silver-haired woman said. She looked at Rowan, who'd shifted back to human and now stood panting and bloodied in the snow. "Rowan Varric. It's been a long time." Rowan stared at her, something like shock crossing his face. "Kael?" In the flesh. The woman, Kael, smiled grimly. "We heard rumors, a cursed alpha traveling with a child. Thought it might be you." Her eyes shifted to Elowen. "And this must be the woman who broke the curse." Elowen didn't know what to say. She just held Mira tighter. Kael turned to the mage. "You're trespassing on neutral ground. The boundary accords forbid aggression this far north." "These lands belong to the council," the mage started. "These lands belong to no one." Kael's voice hardened. "But if you want to test that claim, we're happy to settle it right here." The shifters behind her growled in unison, a sound that raised every hair on Elowen's body. The mage looked between Kael and the remaining soldiers. Half of them were wounded or dead. The rest looked terrified. She lowered her hands. "This isn't over." "It is for tonight," Kael said. The mage gestured sharply, and the soldiers began to retreat, dragging their wounded with them. Within minutes, they'd vanished into the darkness, leaving only blood and ash behind. Elowen sagged, her legs nearly giving out. Rowan caught her, his arm around her waist. Kael approached slowly, her eyes sharp and assessing. "You've made powerful enemies, Rowan." "Tell me something I don't know," he muttered. Kael's gaze shifted to Elowen. "And you, the human who broke an elder curse." She tilted her head. "How?" "I don't know," Elowen said honestly. I couldn't let him die." Something flickered in Kael's expression. Respect, maybe, or surprise. "Well, you're either very brave or very foolish." "Probably both," Elowen said. Kael smiled, a real smile this time, sharp-edged but genuine. "I like you." She looked at Rowan. "Come. We'll take you to Greyvale. You'll be safe there." "Greyvale?" Rowan's voice was wary. "I thought it fell during the purges." "It did. We rebuilt." Kael gestured to the forest. "We've been rebuilding for years, creating a place where our kind can live without hiding, without fear." "And humans?" Elowen asked quietly. Kale's eyes met hers. That depends on the human. It wasn't an answer, but it wasn't a rejection either. Rowan looked at Elowen, the question clear in his eyes. Do we trust them? Elowen looked back at the burning cabin. Everything she'd owned, everything she'd built in her 16 months of exile, reduced to ash. Then she looked at Mira, still clinging to her, and at Rowan, bloodied but alive. They had nothing left here. No home, no safety. Only each other. Okay, she said. We'll go. The journey to Greyville took 3 days. They traveled through deep forest, following paths Elowen would never have found on her own. The shifters moved like ghosts, silent and sure-footed, and Rowan fell into step with them easily, like muscle memory kicking in after years of disuse. Elowen and Mira struggled to keep up. The cold bit through their inadequate clothing. The terrain was brutal, but every time Elowen faltered, Rowan was there, steadying her, carrying Mira when the little girl's legs gave out, sharing his warmth when they stopped to rest. Kale watched them with sharp, calculating eyes. On the second night, she sat down next to Elowen by the fire. You're stronger than you look, Elowen snorted. I'm really not. You are. Kale poked the fire with a stick. Most humans would have collapsed by now, or begged us to carry them. I don't beg. No. Kale studied her. I can see that. They sat in silence for a while, watching the flames. Can I ask you something? Elowen said finally. You just did. Elowen smiled despite herself. Why did you help us? You don't know me. And Rowan, you said it's been a long time, so why risk your people to save us? Kale was quiet for a moment. Then she said, because the council is getting bolder. They've been pushing farther north every year, burning villages, killing anyone with even a hint of old blood. If we don't push back, if we don't show them we're still here, still strong, then they'll keep coming until there's nothing left of us. So we're a symbol. You're more than that. Kale's eyes gleamed. You broke a curse that's been unbroken for 5 years. Do you understand what that means? Not really. It means you have power. Not magic maybe, but something just as valuable. Kale leaned closer. The council rules through fear. They tell people that shifters are monsters, that magic is evil, that anyone who defies them is doomed. But you, she gestured at Elowen, you defied them. And you won. Barely. Doesn't matter. The fact that you survived is enough. Kyle smiled grimly. Stories spread fast in the north. By the time we reach Greyville, everyone will know about the human woman who stood between an alpha and death. They'll know what you did. Elowen's stomach twisted. I didn't do it for glory. I know. That's what makes it powerful. Across the fire, Rowan glanced over at them, his expression unreadable. Elowen looked away, her heart pounding. This moment, Greyville was not what she expected. They crested a ridge on the 3rd day, and Elowen stopped dead, staring. Below them, nestled in a valley between 2 mountains, was a settlement unlike anything she'd ever seen. Not ramshackle cabins or desperate hovels, but buildings, real ones, made of stone and timber, with smoke rising from chimneys and lights glowing in windows. There were fields, gardens, livestock pens. People moved through the streets, dozens of them, going about their lives. It looked normal, almost peaceful. Welcome to Greyville, Kale said. Elowen couldn't speak. They descended into the valley, and as they got closer, Elowen started to notice the differences. The people here were shifters. She could tell by the way they moved, the faint glow in their eyes. But there were humans too, working alongside them. Children played in the streets, laughing and shouting. It was a community, a real one. How? Elowen started, then stopped. She didn't even know what to ask. We built it from nothing, Kyle said. After the purges, the survivors scattered. But some of us refused to stay scattered. We found this valley, claimed it, and started over. The council allows this. The council doesn't know. Kyle's smile was sharp. We're careful. No one comes up here who we don't want. And anyone who stumbles across us by accident? She shrugged. Well, let's just say we're persuasive. Elowen glanced at Rowan, who was staring at the settlement with an expression she couldn't read. Did you know about this? Rumors, he said quietly. I never thought they were true. Kael led them through the streets. People stopped to stare. At Rowan, at Elowin, at Mira. Some looked curious, others hostile. One woman, middle-aged with scars crossing her face, spat on the ground as they passed. "A human? You brought a human here?" "She saved Rowan's life," Kael said evenly. "Show some respect." The woman's eyes narrowed. "Humans are the reason half of us are dead." "And shifters are the reason the other half survived," Kael shot back. "We don't get to pick and choose our allies based on species. Not anymore." The woman stalked away, muttering. Elowin's chest tightened. She'd expected resistance, but it still stung. Rowan's hand found hers, squeezing gently. She squeezed back. They reached a large building at the center of the settlement, a hall of some kind, with thick timber walls and a sloped roof. Kael pushed open the heavy doors. Inside, a fire roared in a massive hearth. Long tables lined the room, and at the far end, seated on a carved wooden chair, was a man. He was old, ancient even, with white hair and a face like weathered stone. But his eyes were sharp, pale green, and when he looked at them, Elowin felt like he was seeing straight through her. "Rowan Varric," the old man said, his voice like gravel. "I heard you were dead." "I was close," Rowan said. The old man's gaze shifted to Elowin. "And this is the human who saved you?" "Yes." "Interesting." The old man stood slowly, leaning on a carved staff. "I am Thorn, elder of Greyvile. And you, girl, what's your name?" "Elowin," she said, lifting her chin. "Elowin Hale." "Elowin Hale," Thorn repeated, as if tasting the name. "Do you know what you've done? I helped someone who needed it. You broke a curse that should have been unbreakable. You defied the council, and now you've brought their attention to our doorstep." His eyes hardened. "So I'll ask you again. Do you know what you've done?" Elowin's hands clenched. "Yes, I know." "Good." Thorn smiled, thin and humorless. "Because there are consequences. The council won't stop hunting you, and by extension, they won't stop hunting us." "I didn't ask to be hunted. None of us did." Thorn's voice was cold. "But here we are." Kael stepped forward. "Thorn, she's not the enemy." "I didn't say she was." Thorn's gaze never left Elowin. "But she's dangerous. To herself, to Rowan, to all of us." He paused. "The question is, what are we going to do about it?" Elowin's heart pounded. She looked at Rowan, at Kael, at the faces watching from the shadows. She'd thought coming here meant safety. But she was wrong. They gave Elowin and Mira a small room in one of the outlying buildings. Barely more than a shed, really, with a narrow bed and a single shuttered window. Rowan stayed with them, refusing to leave despite Kael's suggestion that he take separate quarters. "I'm not leaving them alone," he said flatly. Kael didn't argue. That night, after Mira had fallen asleep, Elowin sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor. "They hate me," she said quietly. "They don't know you yet," Rowan replied. "Thorn does, and he's right. I'm dangerous. We're all dangerous." Rowan crouched in front of her, his hands on her knees. "That's not a reason to give up." "I'm not giving up." Elowin looked at him, her eyes burning. "I'm just tired. I thought we'd be safe here. I thought—" Her voice cracked. "I thought maybe we'd found a place where we could belong." "We will." "How do you know?" "Because I'm not letting you go." His voice was fierce, certain. "You saved my life, Elowin, twice. You stood between me and death when you had every reason to let me die. I don't care what Thorn says. I don't care what anyone says. You belong here. With me." Elowin's breath caught. Rowan's hand cupped her face, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "You're not alone anymore. Understand?" She nodded, unable to speak. "Good." He leaned forward, pressing his forehead against hers. "We'll figure this out, together." The word again, together. And this time, Elowin believed it. The next morning, Thorn summoned them. They stood in the great hall, facing the elder and a council of shifters, hard-faced men and women who looked at Elowin like she was a particularly annoying puzzle. "We've made a decision," Thorn said. "You may stay, for now." Elowin exhaled, relief flooding through her. "But," Thorn continued, his voice sharp, You will earn your place. You're human. You have no magic, no strength beyond what any human possesses. So you will prove your worth. How? Elowen asked. By helping us survive. Thorn gestured to the others. Winter is coming. We need hunters, gatherers, builders. You'll work. You'll contribute. And if you prove yourself valuable, he paused, then perhaps you'll be allowed to stay permanently. It wasn't a warm welcome, but it was a chance. Okay, Elowen said. I'll do it. Good. Thorn's eyes gleamed. And one more thing. What? The council's mage, the one who attacked you. She's been asking questions, sending scouts into the mountains. His expression darkened. She knows we're here, and she's gathering forces to strike. Elowen's blood ran cold. When? Soon, maybe a week, maybe less. Thorn leaned on his staff. Which means we need to be ready, for war. The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Elowen looked at Rowan. His face was grim, his jaw set. Then we'll be ready, she said. Thorn smiled, cold and predatory. We'll see. The days that followed were brutal. Elowen worked from dawn until long after dark, hauling supplies, reinforcing walls, learning to use weapons she'd never touched before. Her hands blistered. Her muscles screamed, but she didn't stop. She couldn't afford to. The other shifters watched her with wary eyes. Some grudgingly accepted her presence. Others made their disdain clear. Whispers in corners, deliberate exclusion, accidents that left her bruised and aching. But Elowen kept going. Rowan stayed close, helping where he could, defending her when things got ugly. Mira too began to thaw, playing with the other children, learning to smile again. And slowly, painfully, Elowen started to carve out a place for herself. Until the night the scouts returned. Elowen was in the great hall, helping prepare defenses when the doors slammed open. A young shifter stumbled in, bloodied and gasping. They're coming, he choked out. The council, hundreds of them, maybe more. The room exploded into chaos. Thorn rose from his chair, his face grim. How long? 2 days, maybe less. Damn. Thorn looked around the hall. Fighters to the walls, everyone else to the shelters. Now. People scattered. Elowen stood frozen, her heart hammering. Rowan grabbed her arm. We need to go. No. She pulled free. I'm staying. I'm fighting. Elowen, I said I'd prove my worth, didn't I? She met his eyes. This is how. Rowan stared at her, something like fear and pride warring in his expression. Then he nodded. Together. Together. They armed themselves. Elowen with a spear she barely knew how to use, Rowan with claws and fury. Around them, Greyvale prepared for war, and 2 days later the council army arrived. Elowen stood on the walls, staring out at the sea of soldiers and siege engines and gleaming weapons, and felt her stomach drop. They were outnumbered, outmatched. This wasn't a fight. It was a slaughter. This wasn't a fight. It was a slaughter. Elowen gripped her spear tighter, her knuckles white, and watched the council's army spread across the valley floor like a stain. Siege towers, catapults, rows upon rows of armored soldiers carrying torches and steel. The mage stood at the center, her dark robes whipping in the wind, her hands already glowing with gathered power. Behind Elowen, Greyvale's defenders lined the walls, maybe 60 fighters total, half of them injured from the skirmishes that had been escalating over the past weeks. Shifters, mostly, with a handful of humans who'd found refuge here over the years. Grim faces, white knuckles on weapons, the smell of fear mixing with smoke from the braziers. They were going to die here. Rowan stood beside her, his jaw set, his eyes tracking the enemy movements with cold calculation. He'd shifted halfway, not quite beast, not quite man, his body caught in that in-between state that let him keep his human mind while accessing the creature's strength. Claws extended from his fingertips, his teeth were sharper, his eyes glowed faint gold. We can't hold them, Elowen said quietly. I know. So what do we do? Rowan didn't answer, because there wasn't an answer. They were trapped. The council had the numbers, the weapons, the magic. Greyvale had desperation and not much else. Thorn appeared on the wall beside them, moving surprisingly fast for a man his age. His face was carved stone, unreadable. They're positioning the siege engines. We have maybe an hour before they start firing. Can we evacuate? Rowan asked. To where? Thorn's laugh was bitter. This valley is surrounded. The only way out is through them. Then we fight, Kyle said, joining them. Her face was streaked with ash, her silver hair pulled back tight. We make them bleed for every inch. That's suicide, Elwyn said. Maybe. Cale's eyes were hard. But it's better than surrender. Elwyn looked out at the army again, at the catapults being wheeled into position, at the mage, who was staring directly at the walls, directly at her, with an expression of cold satisfaction. And something clicked in Elwyn's mind. The mage wanted her, specifically. This whole army, this massive, overwhelming show of force, it wasn't really about Greyveil. It was about making an example, about crushing the woman who'd defied the council and broken a curse they'd declared unbreakable. It was about pride. What if I surrender? Elwyn said. Everyone turned to stare at her. What? Rowan's voice was sharp, dangerous. The mage wants me, so give her what she wants. Elwyn's heart was racing, but her voice stayed steady. I walk out there, I give myself up, and maybe she lets Greyveil go. No, Rowan grabbed her arm. Absolutely not. It's the only way. It's not a way at all. She'll kill you the second you step off these walls. Maybe, Elwyn said. But maybe she won't. Maybe she'll drag it out, make a spectacle of it, buy you time to evacuate the children, the wounded. I said no. Rowan's grip tightened. I'm not letting you throw your life away for people who've done nothing but treat you like dirt since you got here. They're still people, and you're still the woman who saved my life. His eyes blazed. I don't care what tactical sense it makes. I don't care if it buys us time. You're not doing this. Elwyn looked at him, at the fear and fury and desperate love written across his face, and felt her resolve waver. But then she looked past him, at the defenders, at the young shifter who'd brought the warning, barely 16 years old and shaking so hard his spear rattled against the stone, at the woman with the scarred face who'd spat at Elwyn's feet, now standing with her back straight and her jaw set, ready to die defending her home, at Mira, huddled in the shelter below with the other children, probably terrified out of her mind. I have to try, Elwyn whispered. No, you don't. Yes, I do. She pulled her arm free gently. Because that's who I am, Rowan. That's who I've always been. I can't watch people die when there's even a chance I could stop it. Rowan stared at her, his chest heaving. Then he turned to Thorn. Tell her this is insane. Thorn was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, It won't work. The mage wants blood. Yours, ours. She doesn't care. Surrender won't satisfy her. Then what will? Elwyn demanded. Nothing. Thorn's voice was flat. She's here to eradicate us. That's always been the council's goal. So we just wait to die? We fight. Thorn looked at her, and for the first time something almost like respect flickered in his eyes. But not the way they expect. Kyle straightened. What are you thinking? The mage is their linchpin. She's the one holding that army together, fueling their confidence with her magic. Thorn pointed at the distant figure in dark robes. Take her out, and the rest might fracture. How? Rowan asked. She's protected, surrounded by guards, and even if we got close, we don't need to get close. Thorn turned to Elwyn. You broke one curse. Think you can break another? Elwyn blinked. What? The mage's power comes from binding magic, old magic, same kind that cursed Rowan. Thorn's eyes gleamed. But you severed that binding once. What if you could do it again? I don't know how I did it the first time, Elwyn said. It just happened. Because you were willing to die for him. Thorn gestured at Rowan. That kind of sacrifice, that kind of choice. It has power. The old magic recognizes it. So you want her to throw herself at the mage and hope for the best? Rowan's voice was incredulous. That's your plan? No. Thorn smiled grimly. I want her to get close enough to disrupt the mage's concentration, and while she's doing that, we hit them with everything we've got. Kael frowned. It's a gamble. Everything is. Thorn looked at Elwyn. But it's a better gamble than waiting here to be slaughtered. What do you say, girl? You willing to risk it? Elowen's mind raced. It was insane, reckless, the kind of plan that would get her killed 9 times out of 10. But it was a plan, and it was better than nothing. "Okay," she said. "I'll do it." Rowan made a sound like a wounded animal. "Elowen, I'm doing this." She turned to him, cupping his face in her hands. "But I need you to promise me something. And anything. If this goes wrong, if I don't make it, you take Mira and run. Get her somewhere safe. Don't look back. I'm not leaving you. Promise me." Rowan's eyes were wet. He pressed his forehead against hers, his breath ragged. "I promise." "Good." She kissed him, quick and fierce and desperate. Then she pulled back and turned to Thorn. "What do I need to do, Ad?" The plan was simple in concept, brutal in execution. Elowen would walk out under a white flag, claiming she wanted to negotiate. The council would probably see through it, but the mage's arrogance would make her curious enough to let Elowen get close. And once Elowen was close enough, she'd do something. Disrupt the magic, break the binding, whatever it was she'd done before. Meanwhile, Greyvale's defenders would position themselves for a coordinated strike. The moment the mage's concentration broke, they'd hit the council's forces from multiple angles, sowing chaos, creating openings for evacuation. It was a long shot, but it was all they had. Elowen stood at the gates, clutching a strip of white cloth tied to a spear shaft. Her hands were shaking. Sweat ran down her spine despite the cold. Rowan stood beside her, still in his half-shifted state. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do." "Then I'm coming with you." "No." Elowen's voice was firm. "You're more useful here. When things go bad, and they will, they'll need you." "Elowen, please." She looked at him, memorizing his face, the sharp angles, the scars, the golden eyes that had watched her with such fierce loyalty. "Please just trust me." Rowan's jaw worked. Then he nodded, once, sharp and reluctant. The gates creaked open. Elowen stepped through. The valley floor stretched before her, covered in trampled snow and mud. The council's army watched her approach, weapons raised, firelight glinting off steel. Elowen kept walking, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break her ribs. Halfway across the distance, a line of soldiers stepped forward, blocking her path, and the mage walked through them. She was younger than Elowen had realized, maybe 30, with sharp features and cold gray eyes. Her robes were immaculate, despite the mud and ash. Power radiated off her like heat shimmer. "Elowen Hale," the mage said. Her voice was smooth, almost pleasant. "How predictable." Elowen lifted her chin. "I want to talk." "No, you don't. You want to buy time." The mage smiled. "It's admirable, really. Futile, but admirable. If you're so sure I can't stop you, why not hear me out?" The mage's eyes narrowed. "What could you possibly say that would interest me?" "You want me, right? That's why you're here." Elowen gestured at the army. "This whole display, it's about making an example of the woman who defied the council, among other things. So take me. Let Greyvale go, and I'll come quietly." The mage laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "You think I'm that stupid? The moment I let my guard down, your wolf will tear my throat out. Rowan won't. Rowan Varric is a cursed abomination who should have been executed years ago." The mage's smile faded. "And you're the fool who broke his binding. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I saved his life." "You unleashed a monster." The mage stepped closer. "The old magic exists for a reason, girl. It keeps things like him contained, and you shattered it with your pathetic human sentimentality." "He's not a monster," Elowen said quietly. "He's more human than you'll ever be." The mage's face twisted. "You'll regret those words." She raised her hands, and magic crackled between her fingers, bright, burning, lethal. Elowen didn't move, didn't flinch. She just stared into the mage's eyes and said, "Do it." The mage hesitated. Just for a second, just long enough for doubt to flicker across her face. And in that second, Elowen lunged. She didn't go for the mage's throat or her hands. She went for the amulet hanging around the woman's neck, a small stone pendant that pulsed faintly with the same sickly light as the curse marks Elowen had seen on Rowan. Her fingers closed around it. The mage screamed. Light exploded outward, not the burning white of the mage's magic, but something else, something older, golden and warm and alive. It surged through Elowen like a river breaking through a dam, and she felt it, the binding magic, the threads of power that held the mage's control together. And she pulled. The amulet shattered in her hand. The mage staggered back, her eyes wide with shock. The glow around her hands flickered and died. Behind her, the council soldiers hesitated, confused. "Now!" Elowen screamed. Greyvale's gate slammed open. Rowan led the charge, his beast form massive and terrifying, flanked by Kael and a dozen other shifters. They hit the council's lines like an avalanche, tearing through the confusion, sowing chaos. The mage recovered fast, raising her hands again, but without the amulet, her magic was weaker, unfocused. She hurled a blast of fire at Elowen, who barely rolled out of the way. "You bitch!" the mage snarled. Elowen scrambled to her feet, weaponless, bleeding from a dozen scrapes. The mage advanced, magic crackling around her fingers. And then Rowan was there. He slammed into the mage with the force of a battering ram, driving her into the mud. She screamed, trying to gather magic, but Rowan's jaws closed around her wrist and crunched. Bones snapped. The mage shrieked, "Enough!" Rowan growled, his voice distorted but unmistakable. The mage stared up at him, her face white with pain and fury. "You can't." "I can." Rowan's claws pressed against her throat. "And I will, unless you call off your army. Never, then die." "Wait!" The voice came from behind them. Elowen turned to see a council officer, an older man in polished armor, stepping forward, his hands raised. "Enough," the officer said again. He looked at the mage, then at the battlefield where Greyvale's defenders were holding their own, then back at Rowan. "This has gone too far." "Your mage started it," Rowan said, "and I'm ending it." The officer's face was grim. "We came here to eliminate a threat, but if this woman can break binding magic with her bare hands—" He looked at Elowen, something like fear in his eyes. "Then maybe the threat isn't what we thought it was." The mage spat blood. "You coward! I'm a realist." The officer gestured sharply, and his soldiers began to lower their weapons. "We're outmatched, not in numbers, but in something more important." He looked at Elowen again. Conviction. Elowen stared at him, her chest heaving. "You're retreating." "We're reassessing." The officer's jaw tightened. "The council will hear about this, about you, and they'll make their own judgment. And until then?" "Until then, Greyvale has a reprieve." He looked at Rowan. "Let her go." Rowan growled, low and dangerous. "Let her go," the officer repeated, "or I'll order my men to fire and we'll all die here. Your choice." Rowan's claws tightened for a moment. Then, slowly, he stepped back. The mage scrambled to her feet, clutching her broken wrist, her face twisted with hate. "This isn't over." "It is for today," the officer said flatly. He gestured, and two soldiers moved to support the mage. "Move out!" The council's army began to withdraw, slowly, weapons still ready, but retreating nonetheless. Within an hour, they were gone, disappearing into the forest like a nightmare fading at dawn. Elowen stood in the mud, shaking, and watched them go. Rowan shifted back to human form and pulled her into his arms. She collapsed against him, her legs giving out. "You did it," he whispered, his voice rough. "You actually did it." "I don't know what I did," Elowen managed. "You saved us." Kael appeared beside them, bloodied but grinning. "That's what you did." Behind them, Greyvale's defenders were cheering, ragged, exhausted, but alive. Thorn limped forward, leaning heavily on his staff, and looked at Elowen with something that might have been respect. "Well," the old man said, "I'll be damned." Elowen laughed, a broken, hysterical sound. "Does this mean I've earned my place?" "You've earned more than that." Thorn's eyes gleamed. "You've earned a legend, Bashem." The days after the battle were strange. Greyvale began to rebuild. The wounded were tended. The dead, 3 shifters and 1 human, were honored. And Elowen found herself at the center of something she didn't quite understand. People looked at her differently now. The whispers had changed from hostile to awed. The woman with the scarred face, her name was Marin, Elowen learned, approached her one evening and offered a gruff apology. "I was wrong about you," Marin said, not meeting Elowen's eyes. "You're tougher than you look." "Thanks," Elowen said, unsure how else to respond. I mean it. Marin finally looked at her. You fought for us. Even though we treated you like shit, that takes something. It takes being too stupid to know when to quit, Elowen said. Marin laughed, a real laugh, surprised and genuine. Maybe, but it also takes guts. She walked away, and Elowen stood there, feeling oddly lighter. Rowan found her later, sitting on the wall and staring out at the mountains. He climbed up beside her, silent for a moment. You're a hero now, he said finally. Elowen snorted. I'm really not. Tell that to them. He gestured at the settlement below, where people moved about their work with a sense of purpose that hadn't been there before. You gave them hope. That's more valuable than any weapon. I just did what needed to be done. Exactly. Rowan looked at her, his eyes warm. You saw a problem and you fixed it. No hesitation, no excuses, just action. Elowen shook her head. I was terrified the whole time. I know. He smiled. That's what makes it brave. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun set behind the peaks. What happens now? Elowen asked. Now? Rowan considered. Now we live. We rebuild. We prepare for the next fight, because there will be one, but we do it together. Together, Elowen echoed. He took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. I meant what I said before. You're not alone anymore. Neither are you. The sky turned gold, then pink, then deep purple as the stars began to appear. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Elowen felt something that wasn't fear or exhaustion or desperate determination. She felt peace. It wouldn't last. She knew that. The council would regroup. The mage would want revenge. There would be more battles, more struggles, more impossible choices. But for now, sitting on the wall with Rowan's hand in hers and Greyvale bustling below, Elowen let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd found something worth fighting for. The council's messenger arrived a week later. He rode in alone, unarmed, carrying a white flag and a sealed letter. Thorn read it in the great hall, his face unreadable, while Elowen and Rowan waited. Finally, the old man looked up. They want to negotiate. Negotiate what? Kael demanded. A truce. Of sorts. Thorn set the letter down. They're willing to recognize Greyvale as neutral territory. No more raids, no more purges. In exchange, he looked at Elowen. They want you. Elowen's stomach dropped. Want me how? To study. To understand how you broke the binding magic. Thorn's voice was carefully neutral. They claim it's for research. For the greater good. It's a trap, Rowan said immediately. Probably. Thorn shrugged. But it's also an opportunity. If they're willing to talk, it means they're afraid. And fear makes people negotiate. Or it makes them desperate, Kael said. Either way, we have leverage we didn't have before. Thorn looked at Elowen. The question is, what do you want to do? Elowen stared at the letter, her mind racing. A truce would mean safety for Greyvale, for Mira, for all the people who'd finally started to accept her. But it would also mean giving herself up, walking into the council's hands with no guarantees she'd come out alive. I need time to think, she said. You have until tomorrow. Thorn stood. The messenger is waiting for a response. Elowen nodded and left the hall, her chest tight. Rowan followed her outside. They walked in silence until they reached the edge of the settlement, where the forest began. You're not actually considering this, Rowan said. I don't know. Elowen leaned against a tree, exhausted. If it could save Greyvale, it won't. They'll take you, study you, and then kill you. And then they'll come for us anyway. You don't know that. I know the council. Rowan's voice was hard. I know what they do to people who threaten their power. You're not just a threat, Elowen. You're proof that their laws are breakable. That their magic isn't absolute. They can't let that stand. So what's the alternative? We keep fighting until they finally overwhelm us? If that's what it takes. Rowan grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. I'm not letting them take you, not after everything we've been through. It's not your choice. Like hell it isn't. His eyes blazed. You're mine, Elowen, and I'm yours. That's the bond we made, whether we meant to or not. So if you go to the council, I'm going with you. And if they try to hurt you, I'll burn their whole goddamn world down." Elowen stared at him, her breath catching. "I love you," Rowan said, his voice rough. "I don't know when it happened. Maybe when you opened your door. Maybe when you threw yourself in front of a crossbow. Maybe the moment you looked at me like I was worth saving. But I do. And I'm not losing you." Tears stung Elowen's eyes. "Rowan, say it back." She swallowed hard. "I love you too, you idiot." He kissed her then, fierce and desperate, and Elowen kissed him back with everything she had, all the fear and hope and impossible love she'd been holding inside. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. "We'll find another way," he whispered. "Together." "Together," Elowen agreed. And somewhere in the distance, the messenger waited for an answer that would change everything. But for now, in this moment, Elowen let herself believe that love, messy, imperfect, defiant love, was enough. Even if the world said otherwise. Even if the world said otherwise. Elowen pulled back first, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "We should get back. Thorn's waiting for an answer." "Let him wait." Rowan's arms stayed around her waist, solid and warm. "We're not making this decision in a rush. We don't have much time. Then we'll use what we have." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Think, Elowen. Really think. What do you want? Not what's tactical. Not what might save the most people. What do you want?" She closed her eyes. The question felt impossibly heavy. What did she want? A year ago, the answer would have been simple. Acceptance. A place to belong. Someone to tell her she was worth something. But now? Now she had Rowan, who looked at her like she hung the moon. She had Mira, who'd started calling her Mama in soft whispers when she thought no one was listening. She had Greyville, this rough, fractured community that was slowly, grudgingly becoming home. She had everything she'd ever wanted, and the council was asking her to risk it all on a promise they'd probably break the moment she walked into their custody. "I want to stay," she said finally, opening her eyes. "Here, with you, with all of this." Rowan's smile was fierce and relieved. "Then we tell the council to go to hell. That'll start another war. Maybe, but at least we'll be fighting it on our terms." Elowen nodded slowly. "Okay, then that's what we do." They walked back to the great hall hand in hand, and Elowen felt something settle in her chest. Not peace exactly, but certainty. She'd spent too long letting other people decide her worth, letting them define what she could and couldn't do. Not anymore. Thorn was waiting, along with Kael and the council messenger, a thin man with nervous eyes who kept glancing at the door like he expected violence. "Well?" Thorn asked. Elowen looked the messenger in the eye. "Tell your council the answer is no." The man blinked. "I what?" "No." Elowen's voice was steady. "I'm not coming, and if they want to negotiate, they can come here. To neutral ground, face to face. If the council doesn't negotiate with, then there's nothing else to discuss." Elowen crossed her arms. "You can leave now." The messenger stared at her, his mouth opening and closing. Then he looked at Thorn. "You're going to allow this?" Thorn's smile was sharp as broken glass. "She speaks for herself. Always has." The messenger's face went pale. He gathered his cloak and hurried out, nearly tripping over his own feet. When the door slammed shut, Kael started laughing. "That was beautiful." "That was reckless," Thorn corrected, but he didn't sound angry. "The council won't take this well." "I know," Elowen met his gaze, "but I'm done being afraid of them." "Good," Thorn nodded slowly, "because we're going to need that fire for what comes next." What came next was silence. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. No messengers, no armies, no threats, just quiet. It made everyone nervous. Kael doubled the patrols. Thorn had the defenses reinforced. Rowan spent long hours in beast form, prowling the perimeter, testing the wind for threats that never materialized. Elowen threw herself into work. She helped repair the walls damaged in the battle. She learned to hunt, badly at first, but with improving skill. She sat with the other women and mended clothes and listened to their stories, and slowly, painfully, started to feel like part of something. Mira blossomed. The little girl who'd been silent and terrified was starting to laugh, to play, to trust. She followed Elowen everywhere, her small hand always reaching for Elowen's, and sometimes at night she'd whisper, "I love you, Mama." And Elowen's heart would crack open all over again. "She's healing," Rowan said one evening, watching Mira chase another child through the settlement. "Because of you." "Because she's safe," Elowen corrected. "That's all kids need, to feel safe. And loved." "That too." Rowan pulled her close, his chin resting on her head. They stood like that for a while, watching the children play, and Elowen let herself imagine a future where this was normal, where Mira grew up strong and happy, where she and Rowan grew old together in this valley. It felt impossible, fragile, but it felt real. And then, on the 15th day, everything changed. Sir, the scouts spotted them first, a group of riders approaching from the south. Not an army this time, just 6 people on horseback moving slowly, carrying a white flag. Thorn called an emergency meeting. "It could be a trap." "Could be," Kyle agreed. "Or it could be the negotiation," Elowen demanded. "Either way, we meet them outside the walls." Thorn looked at Elowen. "This was your call. You should be there." Elowen's stomach twisted, but she nodded. "Okay." They assembled a small group: Thorn, Kale, Rowan, Elowen, and 4 of Greyvale's best fighters. They rode out to meet the council delegation in the center of the valley, where the snow was trampled and stained from the last battle. The council's representatives dismounted. Elowen recognized 2 of them immediately, the officer who'd called the retreat and the mage, her wrist still bandaged and her face tight with barely controlled fury. But it was the third person who made Elowen's breath catch: Marcus. He looked older, thinner. There were new lines around his mouth, and his eyes had a hollowness that hadn't been there before. "Elowen," he said quietly. "Marcus." Her voice was flat. "Didn't expect to see you here." "I didn't expect to be here." He glanced at Rowan, standing protectively at Elowen's side, then back at her. "But here I am." "Why?" Elowen demanded. "What does the council want now?" The officer stepped forward. "We want to talk, genuinely this time." "You tried to burn us alive," Kyle said. "Forgive us if we're skeptical." "That was a mistake." The officer's jaw tightened. One we're prepared to acknowledge. The mage made a sharp sound of protest, but the officer silenced her with a look. "The council has reviewed what happened," the officer continued, "and we've reconsidered our position." "Meaning what exactly?" Thorn asked. "Meaning the laws regarding the cursed, the old magic. They're not as absolute as we believed." The officer looked at Elowen. "You proved that, and it's forced us to ask some uncomfortable questions." "Such as?" Rowan's voice was low, dangerous. "Such as whether eradication is really the answer, or whether there's another way." The officer took a breath. "The council is willing to offer Greyvale formal recognition, legal protection, in exchange for," he hesitated, "cooperation." "What kind of cooperation?" Elowen asked. "Information about how you broke the binding, about the old magic." The officer's eyes were steady. "Not to weaponize it, but to understand it, to find ways to coexist with it." "Coexist," Kyle repeated, her voice dripping skepticism. "You've spent decades trying to wipe us out, and now you want to coexist?" "We've spent decades afraid," the officer said bluntly. "Fear makes people do terrible things, but it also makes them blind. We didn't see what we were destroying, who we were destroying." He looked at Rowan. "Until we couldn't ignore it anymore." Rowan's expression was unreadable. "And if we refuse?" "Then the council will continue to see you as a threat, and eventually they'll send another army, a bigger one." The officer's voice was grim. "We're offering you a chance to end this, peacefully. But it's a limited offer." Elowen looked at Marcus. "And what's your role in this?" Marcus flinched. "I'm here because I owe you an apology." "Little late for that." "I know." His voice cracked. "But I'm saying it anyway. I was wrong. About you. About everything. I let fear and tradition dictate my choices, and He swallowed hard. "I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me." Elowen stared at him, her chest tight. A year ago, those words would have meant everything, would have felt like vindication. Now they just felt hollow. "I don't forgive you," she said quietly. "But I don't hate you either. You're just someone I used to know." Marcus nodded, his eyes wet. "That's more than I deserve." The officer cleared his throat. "So, do we have terms to discuss?" Thorne looked at Elowin. Kyle looked at Elowin. Rowan looked at Elowin. The decision, once again, was hers. She took a breath. "If we agree to this, if we share information, the council has to do more than just leave us alone. They have to acknowledge publicly that the cursed aren't monsters, that the old magic isn't inherently evil, that people like Rowan deserve to exist." The officer hesitated. "That's asking for a fundamental shift in doctrine." "I know what I'm asking for." Elowin's voice was steel. "And if the council isn't willing to give it, then we have nothing to talk about." The mage stepped forward, her face twisted with fury. "You arrogant little—" "Enough!" the officer snapped. He looked at Elowin, something like respect in his eyes. "I'll take your terms to the council, but I can't promise they'll accept." "Then we'll keep fighting." Elowin met his gaze. "Until they do." The officer smiled faintly. "You're either very brave or very foolish." "I've heard that before," Elowin said. The council's formal response took a month. During that time, Greyvale held its breath. Patrols stayed vigilant, defenses stayed strong. But slowly, cautiously, life began to normalize. Elowin and Rowan built a small cabin on the edge of the settlement. Nothing fancy, but solid and warm. Mira helped, carrying tools and nails with fierce determination. At night, the three of them would sit by the fire, and Rowan would tell stories from before the curse, and Mira would fall asleep between them, safe and loved. It felt like a family. And when the council's messenger finally arrived with a sealed scroll, Elowin opened it with shaking hands. The terms were simple, blunt, almost shocking in their concession. The council would formally recognize Greyvale as autonomous territory. They would revise this doctrine on cursed magic, acknowledging that not all old magic was evil. They would establish a commission, half council members, half representatives from the northern communities, to study coexistence. In exchange, Greyvale would share knowledge about breaking binding curses, and Elowin would serve as liaison between the two groups. It wasn't perfect. There were loopholes, ambiguities, places where the council could still cause harm if they wanted to, but it was a start. Thorne read the terms and laughed, a sound like breaking stone. "They actually did it. The bastards actually did it." "Do we accept?" Kyle asked. Thorne looked at Elowin. "What do you think?" Elowin looked around the great hall, at the faces watching her with hope and fear and trust, at Rowan, standing steady at her side, at Mira, peeking out from behind a table. She thought about the woman she'd been 16 months ago, broken, discarded, convinced she was worthless, and she thought about the woman she was now, scarred, stubborn, loved. "We accept," she said, "but we do it carefully, with eyes open. And if they break this agreement, then we break them," Rowan finished. Elowin smiled. "Exactly. So, the first meeting of the commission happened in spring, when the snow finally melted and the valley turned green. The council sent 5 representatives, including the officer. His name was Commander Aldrich, Elowin learned. Greyvale sent 5 of their own: Thorne, Kyle, Rowan, Elowin, and a young shifter named Finn who'd lost his entire family to the purges. They met in a neutral building hastily constructed at the valley's edge, a simple structure with a long table and chairs. It was awkward, tense. The first 2 hours were spent arguing about semantics and territory and who had authority over what. But then Finn spoke up. "Can I say something?" His voice was quiet, uncertain. Everyone turned to look at him. "I was 8 when the hunters came to my village," Finn said. "They killed my parents, my sister, everyone I knew. I survived because I hid, because I was too scared to fight." He looked at the council representatives. "I've spent my whole life believing that humans wanted me dead, that there was no point in trying to coexist, but—" He glanced at Elowin. "She proved me wrong. A human. She risked everything for one of us. So maybe there's hope, if we're willing to try." The room fell silent. Then Commander Aldrich spoke. My brother was killed by a shifter raid when I was 12. For years I believed all your kind were monsters. That eradication was the only answer. He looked at Rowan. But I've seen you fight to protect, not destroy. I've seen you show mercy when you had every reason not to. And it's made me question everything I thought I knew. Another silence. Longer this time. Finally, Thorn cleared his throat. Well, if we're all done comparing trauma, maybe we can get to work. Someone laughed, a nervous, surprised sound. Then another person joined in. And another. The tension didn't disappear, but it cracked, just enough. They talked for hours that day, made no grand decisions, solved no major problems. But they talked, and they listened. And that, Elowen thought, was enough for now. Odds. 6 months after the agreement, Greyvale had changed. The settlement had grown. New families had arrived, shifters fleeing persecution, humans seeking refuge, people who'd heard the stories and wanted to see if they were true. The valley was crowded now, noisy, alive with the sound of hammers and laughter and arguments. It wasn't perfect. There were still tensions, still distrust. Still days when Elowen wanted to scream from the sheer frustration of trying to bridge two worlds that had been at war for generations. But there were also moments of grace. A shifter child teaching a human child how to track rabbits. A council mage working alongside Kael to develop non-lethal binding magic. Families from both sides sharing meals, telling stories, finding common ground. It was messy, complicated, fragile. It was real. Elowen stood on the wall one evening, watching the sun set, and felt Rowan's arms wrap around her from behind. Tired? He asked. Exhausted. Worth it? She leaned back against him. Yeah, it is. They stood in silence for a while, watching the light fade. I've been thinking, Rowan said finally. Dangerous. He laughed softly. About us. About the future. Elowen's heart kicked. What about it? I want to ask you something, officially. He turned her around to face him, his hands on her shoulders. Marry me. Elowen blinked. What? Marry me. By shifter custom, by human custom. I don't care, just... He cupped her face. Say you'll spend the rest of your life with me. Officially. Tears stung Elowen's eyes. We don't need a ceremony to make that real. I know, but I want it anyway. I want everyone to know you're mine, and I'm yours. His smile was crooked. I want Mira to grow up knowing her parents are bonded, not just whatever we are now. We're already bonded, Elowen whispered. Then make it official. She kissed him, soft and slow and full of promise. When she pulled back, she was smiling through tears. Okay, yes, I'll marry you. Rowan's grin was brilliant. He picked her up and spun her around, and Elowen laughed, feeling light and free and impossibly, wonderfully happy. The wedding happened 3 weeks later, under the open sky with the whole settlement watching. It was a strange ceremony, part shifter tradition, part human custom, part improvised chaos. Kael officiated, which meant there were at least 3 inappropriate jokes and 1 threat of violence. Mira served as flower girl and took her job with adorable seriousness. Thorn gave a speech that was equal parts blessing and warning. And when Rowan and Elowen exchanged vows, promises to stand together, to fight together, to love each other through whatever storms came next, there wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. Even the council representatives who'd been invited looked moved. The celebration afterward was loud and joyful and lasted until dawn. People danced, drank, told stories, laughed until they cried. And when it was finally over, when the last guest had stumbled home, Elowen and Rowan stood alone in front of their cabin, watching the sun rise over the mountains. We did it, Elowen said softly. We did. What now? Rowan smiled. Now we live. 2 years later, Elowen stood in the Great Hall, addressing a crowd of representatives from 12 different communities, shifter, human, and everything in between. She'd been appointed as the official liaison for the Northern Territories, a role she'd accepted with reluctance and determination. It meant endless meetings, constant travel, and more politics than she'd ever wanted to deal with. But it also meant change, real, tangible change. The council had formally abolished the hunting laws. Shifter communities were being granted legal recognition across the realm. Mixed settlements, like Greyvale, were sprouting up all over the north. It was slow, messy, imperfect, but it was happening. "We've come a long way," Elowen said, looking out at the assembled faces. "But we still have farther to go. There are still places where fear rules, where old hatreds run deep, where people like us," she gestured to herself and the shifters in the crowd, "are seen as threats." She paused, letting the words settle. "But I believe we can change that. Not through force, not through fear, but through the same thing that got us here in the first place." She looked at Rowan, standing in the back with Mira, now 7 years old and sharp as a blade, at his side. Through choosing compassion over cruelty, through standing up when it would be easier to stay silent, through believing that the world can be better, even when everything says it can't. The room was silent. Then someone started clapping. Then another, and another. Within moments, the entire hall was on its feet, applauding. Elowen felt tears prick her eyes. She looked at Thorne, who nodded once, proud and approving, at Kael, who grinned and whistled, at the council representatives, who clapped with genuine respect, and at her family. Rowan and Mira, watching her with love and pride. She'd been cast out, discarded, told she was worthless, and now she stood at the center of a movement that was reshaping the world. Not because she was perfect, not because she was powerful, but because she'd made a choice to open a door, to show mercy, to fight for what was right, even when it cost her everything. After the meeting, Rowan found her outside, staring up at the stars. "You were amazing in there," he said. "I was terrified." "That's what makes it amazing." He pulled her close. "You know what today is?" "Tuesday?" He laughed. "It's the 3-year anniversary of the night I showed up at your door, bleeding, dying, desperate." Elowen turned to look at him. "Has it really been 3 years?" "It has." Rowan's eyes were soft. 3 years since you saved my life. Since you changed everything." "We changed everything," Elowen corrected. "Together." "Together," he agreed. They stood in silence, watching the stars, and Elowen thought about the woman she'd been. The woman who'd sat alone in a freezing cabin, convinced she had nothing left to offer the world. She'd been wrong, so incredibly wrong, because here she was, married, a mother, a leader, a force for change in a world that had tried to break her. She wasn't perfect. She still had scars, physical and emotional. She still struggled, still doubted, but she was loved, and she loved in return. And that, she'd learned, was the most powerful magic of all. "Thank you," she whispered to Rowan. "For what?" "For trusting me, when no one else did." He kissed her forehead. "Thank you for opening the door." They stood together under the stars, two broken people who'd found each other in the frozen dark and built something beautiful from the wreckage. And in the cabin behind them, Mira slept peacefully, dreaming of a future where monsters and humans lived side by side, where compassion was stronger than fear, where the discarded became the ones who changed the world. It wasn't the end of their story. There would be more challenges, more fights, more impossible choices. But for now, in this moment, Elowen let herself believe in the impossible, because she'd lived it, fought for it, earned it, and she'd do it all over again, 1,000 times, if it meant she got to stand here, loved, whole, and home.